And we begin tonight with the increasingly dangerous rhetoric coming out of the American right. On Thursday, Fox's Greg Gutfeld went on the air and said this.
We had a war over slavery. We knew slavery was inhumane and immoral, but somehow we couldn't solve slavery peacefully. It was an evil, but one side refused to acknowledge that it was evil because it was too big of an admission for them to make. Doesn't that feel that way now, that this defiant refusal to reverse this decline argues against the survival of a country? What does that leave you with? It leaves you with you need to make war to bring peace, because you have a side that cannot change, because then that means an admission that their beliefs have been corrupt all the time. So in a way, you have to force them to surrender.
Or we could make love, not war.
I tried that once.
Or we have an election.
I had to go to a doctor.
Right. Election. Yeah.
No, elections don't work. We know that. We know they don't work.
Just stop for a second and think about what he just told millions of Americans, that this country needs war to bring peace because you have a side that cannot change. You have to force them to surrender. And he couched his little rant in the Civil War, a war in which the people who could not change and whose beliefs were corrupt the whole time shot and killed U.S. troops and declared war on the United States, as well as secession, for the purposes of keeping millions of people in bondage. So what exactly are you suggesting, Greg? Because in addition to civil war, it sure sounds like you're calling for an end to elections. So then what? Are you calling for violence against Democrats until they bend the knee? And what happens next? Do you militarize Democratic states and cities and force the 84 million people who voted for President Biden and the majority of Americans who want women to own their own bodies and gun reform and police reform and to save the climate and let LGBTQ people live their lives? Will that majority have to live under armed occupation? This is the madness that is being broadcast to millions of Americans on one of Fox's most popular shows, apparently with the full support of Rupert and Lachlan Murdoch. To be clear, no normal news network would allow that to be said on air. But you can say it on Fox. I should note we reached out to Fox, but we did not receive a response in regard to whether or not this is acceptable. The same day that Greg Gutfeld was calling for a new civil war, we learned that a man was arrested in Madison, Wisconsin, because he illegally brought a loaded handgun into the Wisconsin Capitol, demanding to see Democratic Governor Tony Evers. Then, after posting bail, he returned to the Capitol with an assault rifle. Fortunately, the governor was not there. Less fortunate is the indigenous justice activist who was shot in the chest last week by a man wearing a Make America Great Again hat during a protest against the reinstallation of a statue honoring a Spanish conquistador in New Mexico. According to the arrest affidavit, the perpetrator was smiling and laughing during an interview with investigators. These are just two recent examples, but in the age of Trump, we have seen a long list of violent attacks. From the anti-Semitic terrorist attack that took place at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, the deadly stabbing of O'Shea Sibley, a black gay man who was murdered for dancing with friends at a New York City gas station, to the deadly massacre at an El Paso Walmart where the gunman said, quote, which the gunman said was, quote, a response to the Hispanic invasion of Texas, mirroring rhetoric that continues to be used by major conservative political figures and media organizations. And, of course, there is the assault on our Capitol back on January 6, 2021, when thousands of Trump supporters stormed Congress, assaulted police, and looked to lynch elected officials, including the Speaker of the House and the Vice President of the United States, for the apparent crime of certifying an election that was over, according to the U.S. Constitution. The list just goes on and on and on. And yet, despite all of these events, Republican rhetoric remains authoritarian and violent because that is what their leader does.
Well, General Milley, what he did is really treasonous. If you look at what he said to China, he's either stupid or it's treason. But what he said to China should never be allowed. That can never be allowed in our country. If you rob a store, you can fully expect to be shot as you are leaving that store. Shot. We will take on the ultra-left-wing liars, losers, creeps, perverts, and freaks who are devouring the future of this state like a swarm of locusts. We've never seen anything like what's happening in Washington, and I think we have to take it over. We have to take over management of our capital. Nobody has ever seen anything like we're witnessing right now. It is a very sad thing for our country. It's poisoning the blood of our country. It's so bad, and people are coming in with disease.
Poisoning the blood of our country. No Republicans have taken any meaningful steps to criticize their dear leader or demand that he rein in this dangerous garbage. Those who do, like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger or Mitt Romney, are immediately and quickly rejected by the party that they belong to far longer than Donald Trump did. Joining me now is Olivia Troy, former Homeland Security and Counterterrorism Advisor to Vice President Mike Pence, and Ruth Ben-Ghiat, Professor of History at New York University and author of Strongmen, Mussolini to the President. Thank you both for being here. Olivia, I will start with you. This is not new rhetoric for the far right. What's new is that the Republican Party is in on the game from Donald Trump on down. I want to play for you somebody who used to work for Donald Trump, as did you for a time. His name is Steve Bannon. He was Trump's advisor on his campaign, and then he was a White House advisor. This man worked in the White House. Here he is talking about our attorney general and just keeping the violent rhetoric going.
Your day's coming, dude, after January of 2025, when we go back over this whole illegitimate regime and we get into the receipts. He should be in prison for the rest of his life. And my God, if we do our job after we win, he will be in prison for the rest of his life.
Olivia, the rhetoric now is civil war per Fox and imprisoning the attorney general per Steve Bannon. Your thoughts?
Look, this is incredibly dangerous across the board. And I want to just be very clear about something. It's not just, people like Steve Bannon who are out there radicalizing Americans every single day on the exterior, right? And then you've got Trump going out there repeating some of the same rhetoric, by the way, that he used in 2016, right? He then went on to attempt to implement some of these actions that he spoke about on the campaign while doing policy as president. Remember, this is a man who said he wanted to shoot immigrants coming into our country. The migrants coming in, he wanted to shoot at them. This is a man who wanted to shoot people during the Black Lives Matter protest. That's not hyperbole. I was in those meetings when he said it, and it made me sick to my stomach. So when they talk about these things externally, these are the things that they plan to carry out. And I will just point to one thing. Just look at the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, where they're looking at clearing out the government, where there are over 70 organizations that are part of this broad coalition of conservatives. And I say that in quotes because these are more extreme positions that are happening out there. And so when you look at what's happening in this machine of propaganda, and when you look at the potential of what is being planned out, should someone like Trump implement this agenda again, should he return to office within the government and what's happening here, this is where it gets incredibly dangerous at the intersection of all of this.
You know, and Ruth, I want to go back for a second to Greg Gutfeld. Greg Gutfeld, I'm sure, lives in some sort of a penthouse in Manhattan. He's not going to be out there shooting anyone. He'll be on his yacht or whatever. You know, he's like a Tucker Carlson. They are sort of playing at and cosplaying like tough guys. But what he said, if you just go back and look at what he said elections don't work. What he means is that Republicans can't win elections on the issues they care about. They cannot win an election when they say they would like to ban abortion. Women overwhelmingly say no, even in red states. They can't win elections when it comes to things like gun reform. They have to gerrymander their states to make it so that we can't have gun reform. The majoritarian positions that he wants to now solve by having a civil war and forcing the majority to heal, to bend the knee, to do what he says, women to give birth because he says, and all of us to live the way they say. What he's saying is they are the Confederacy in this scenario. What do you make of the fact that that is allowed to be said? We sure as hell couldn't say it here. I'd be fired so fast they wouldn't even let me clean my office out. They would just mail my stuff to me. But on Fox, you can say that, and everyone else sort of chortles along. And no one in management does anything. We couldn't even get a response. Your thoughts?
Well, they're saying that because it's part of a very, it's now, Trump himself since 2016 has been engaged in a very relentless information war and psychological warfare to change Americans' ideas of violence. That from violence being something repugnant to violence being something that is necessary as a way to solve differences. As for the elections, I think I go beyond. It's not just that they're saying they can't win elections. The end game of election denial is not claiming that this or that election was corrupt. It's that we shouldn't have elections at all, right. That elections should not be the way we decide things. And so, violence and getting rid of elections, this is a mentality of coups. And a third of my book is about coups, and we had a coup. And so it's also not just Fox. Matt Gaetz showed up at the Iowa State Fair, and everyone's, munching their corn dogs. And then he says, he's with Trump, he's there to support Trump. And he says, only through force will we bring change to Washington, D.C. And I hear that where he's saying, okay, elections don't work in his own way. We're not going to use reform or legislation. We're going to use violence. So this message is being repeated in the party, in the media, and all the other kind of sectors and think tanks that Olivia's mentioning. So this is an overwhelming kind of influence and psychological warfare campaign designed to create an appetite in Americans for some kind of authoritarian rule.